what is a possible solution to reduce mercury pollution in South Carolina? And a couple of things to consider: should the state have a program to test humans? And should the state issue statewide advisories when there are problems with certain kinds of fish in certain rivers, right?
Yes, we should have advisories. In fact, I think that's the law now. I think there are certain advisories that come out. Many of you know more about that than me. I think, as I understand it, and I don't claim to be all that expert on this issue, but and I've learned recently from some of you what I'm about to think I remember. That is that a great deal of the mercury that we're having problems with in our rivers, and especially the Edisto rivers, I understand it, come from our coal plants. I think that we need to do a great deal of education to the public to make sure that the public is not harmed even when we don't have advisories out there, so that they are aware and can make intelligent choices about fishing and eating fish out of those streams. And I think that we need to, in the future, David, look to a greater reliance on other sources for power generation and get away from coal. That's not something that's going to happen, frankly. Whether I'm governor or any of these fellows are governor in the next 4 years, but it's not going to start to happen unless we have leadership to move away from coal plants over time. And that's going to involve a greater reliance on nuclear energy. It's going to revolve around greater reliance on other alternate sources, biomass, and especially wind, which I think has great potential not only to replace coal plants, but also to create jobs through the existing businesses that are here now and that we can grow to advance the technology and create the manufacturing jobs for wind turbines and the like. Picking up on General Electric, which is here and produces a lot for other countries, they can do that for here. And to follow the ongoing studies off the coast of South Carolina now to be sure that we do have the potential to take advantage of winds off the coast of the northernmost portion of the South Carolina coast, where the studies are ongoing, and create alternate sources to get away from coal to create a solution to the mercury problem. Thanks.
There's a publication, South Carolina Conservation Common Agenda Priorities for 2010. And, the question about the advisories came from this. Statewide mercury advisories should be considered, this says, for suspected freshwater species such as largemouth bass, as has been done in North Carolina. Mullins McLeod.
Yeah, I think whenever you talk about conservation issues, it's important to know the perspective from which your governor is coming from. When I read in the newspaper that there were excess levels of mercury in the Edisto River, it bothered me. I mean, to some people it might just be a river. That's a river I've duck hunted on in every nook and cranny. I've spent more Saturday afternoons in the middle of May catching redbreast. I've skied on that river. It's the largest free-flowing blackwater river in North America. It is a wonderful asset for our state. Clean water is good for our quality of life. And to read that in the newspaper, it bothered me. That was before I even ran for governor. And I think that's important, is what perspective does your governor see these issues from? And that can tell you a lot about how your issues will be advocated. Obviously, coal plants, to me, clean coal is an oxymoron. And I think we've got to identify contamination and we've got to get rid of it. We have got to protect our waterways, and the Edisto River is a perfect example.
Jim Rex.
Well, I agree with Mullins. I think you do need to know the core beliefs of your governor on a whole range of issues, including this one. This thing about mercury in our state, nothing gripes me any more than this. I mean, if you think about it, if a terrorist group came to South Carolina and poisoned our water to the point where we couldn't consume fish that we catch, we'd be bombing somebody somewhere. And this is awful. And I think the state needs to do the testing necessary to see how bad the problem is, not just in the fish, but in South Carolinians who have been consuming these fish. And we do need to have advisories, and we do need to go to the root cause of why we have this mercury poisoning. And we know that coal, of course, is one of the major contributors. We have to do it carefully. We don't want to do something that's going to damage our already frail economic system. But we sure don't want to have a system, a natural system in our state that is poisoning our citizens. And you know, the fish who are at the top of the predatory cycle are the ones who are most likely to have this mercury in them, like largemouth bass. And pregnant women and children can experience the worst damage from consuming this fish. So this is something I think a lot of South Carolinians will get outraged about, especially if they have a connection to the natural world. Mullins talked about fishing and duck hunting and skiing. We've got to get our kids, by the way, more connected to the natural world. That's how we're going to get constituents who support the kinds of changes and reforms we need desperately in the area that you all care about.
Vic Sheen.
Thank you. My Watery River has mercury warnings on it right now. Watery Lake that I spend time in with my kids had PCB levels that were tested at pretty high levels about 2 months ago. These issues are really important. I helped to form the Bi-State River Commission between North Carolina and South Carolina to tackle issues just like this, and we talk about them on a regular basis and promote action and suggest action to our legislators. I think that we ought to have increased testing for mercury and PCBs throughout the state waterways. DHEC is supposed to be performing these. DHEC has suffered from budget cuts as well. I think we need river-specific warnings for mercury and PCBs and other contaminants. I think that we need to have testing that supports that, and right now, frankly, we have a testing program, but it's not as aggressive as I would like it to be. I think statewide warnings are appropriate in some circumstances, but I don't want them to water down these, that's kind of a no pun intended, I don't want them to water down the river-specific warnings, because each body of water in South Carolina is different. It's affected differently by these contaminations. I also agree that we need to move away from burning coal in South Carolina. I think nuclear is an option that some of you support, some of you don't, but I believe it's an option that we're going to have to pursue in the future. I believe that alternative fuels like wind are a great potential for job creation in South Carolina. So it's not only that we get off of coal, but it's also to create jobs in the state that sorely needs them. Biofuels in my rural areas, I represent 3 counties, Chesterfield, Lancaster, and Kershaw, all which need jobs. Biofuels are a great option in those areas, and they can long-term help to reduce mercury contamination, other contamination. I see these problems as problems, but also as opportunities, and I think that's how we should approach them.
Andre Bauer.
Yes, we definitely should issue advisories. We also should test more than we do. Another issue that we actually haven't talked about, and I'm sure you'll get to, but is the overusage in general. In South Carolina, we're one of the higher users per capita than other states, and this has got to be an educational issue. We've got to do something to try to change behaviors in South Carolina, and I hope the next governor will lead the way on pushing for reduction in some of these things. Also, I do agree with the Senator. We need to look at nuclear, and we need to look at solar. I actually had a solar company here last week that's interested and invested in South Carolina. Put them together with Boyd Brown, and he actually is going to be with them next Friday at their company in Charlotte, showing them what they're doing up there, and they want to come and spend millions of dollars in South Carolina. So as a lieutenant governor, I've already been talking to companies that want to come here. I've talked to another group that want to put a solar university here in South Carolina, and they've teamed up now with Senator McGill. So I've been trying to do some of the due diligence, even in my capacity now, to facilitate getting more folks to look at alternative energy sources. And I've talked about for a long time, I'd like to see South Carolina be known as a tax-free green zone. Any green business that came to South Carolina would be tax exempt at the corporate level. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one is to do an image change of South Carolina to be known as a progressive state, but also the jobs that would bring in, the opportunities it would bring in for South Carolinians would be limitless, and we would be known around the world as a very progressive state. With that, I actually have a 4 o'clock, David, so I'm going to sneak out. I appreciate y'all indulging me for a few minutes and look forward to picking up this conversation later on.